Hi. All right. Welcome to another class on growing plant medicine. Woo! I am feeling so pumped up and excited today. So we're going to get into some awesome techniques today, kind of continuing our path on how to propagate these amazing, healing, life-promoting, soul padding goodness for growing medicine. So today I want to talk about what we're going to focus on. We're going to talk about a few propagation techniques we haven't really dove into yet. So one is going to be root cuttings and root division. So this is what we're going to get out into the garden and dig up a few plants, divide them, cut them, and so it's basically making multiple plants out of one, and that's exciting. Again, for that same reason when we do stem cuttings, it's about propagating our patches, also growing plants for others, just getting more medicine out into our communities. So that's root cuttings and divisions, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll get into transplanting. I know your little babies are sprouting, and that's really exciting, and if they're not quite there yet, that's okay. But we're going to start diving into the topic of transplanting and getting those little babies into their next step. All right, here we go. Okay, so when we get into transplanting our seedlings, it's kind of like, what am I looking for? And like, how do I know when to transplant? And so what you're looking at here is a few different seeding trays of different plants. We've got some skullcap, and we've got some calendula, and then we've got some chamomile. And so basically after that seed germinates, it's going to start sending a radicle down that first rootlet. It's going to have the cotyledons, which are the seed leaves, and then it's going to start producing true leaves. And so what I'm looking for is kind of a movement from infantile into kind of more of a, early youth of a plant, and I'm developing a few sets of true leaves, what I'm calling them. And so if we come down close again and look at the chamomile, and you see these ones that have like kind of leafy, kind of feathery look, those are the more of the true leaves, and so a couple sets of those. And then if you look over here at the calendula, you're seeing some here that have, you can't even see the cotyledons anymore. Both of these are true leaves. And then down here at the skull cap, again, you can see multiple sets of true leaves, and that signifies when I want to transplant. The deal is like, you don't want to transplant them too early, but you also don't want to transplant them too late, because if you transplant them too late, they often will get leggy and not develop as strong of roots and not become as strong of a plant. And so right now we're at this kind of early edge for a lot of these. Some of these are a little bit taller, that's okay. But yeah, you're kind of looking for that early phase. So what we're going to do now is dive into transplanting each of these, and I'll just show you a quick demo. Cool. Cool, first I want to show you some of the tools that I like to use for transplanting. It's pretty straightforward. It's going over to the thrift store and picking up a fork, a knife, and even a spoon. And these tools are great for working with your plants. I also love to use chopsticks too. So we're going to dive in here, and we're going to start with each of these, or start with one of these, and get into transplanting. So first thing I'm going to do is, when I transplant, I want it to be, again, at that time of day when it's cool out. Like if I'm transplanting in the middle of the day, those plants are definitely going to be stressed because they're small, right? And they need to have a really easy transplant. So again, that's early in the morning or in the evening. And the evening is almost better because then they don't even go through that hot period of the day at all. They kind of get to hang out overnight, develop more roots, get comfy, and then they can go through a full day the next day. So right now we're in the late afternoon. It's a great time. The sun is down. I'm not in the sun. If the sun was up, I'd want to be in a shady spot to transplant. So here we go. I'm going to pop right in. Any of my tools can work well for this. I'm going to use the knife, and I'm going to come into one of these bigger patches of chamomile, and I'm going to just tuck that knife right down the side and kind of lift it up, and then I'm going to kind of grab that by the base, and there's a lot of little seedlings in there. You might find this as well. These can be divided as well. So when I divide, it's actually, I kind of grab a section of it and find like where there's a little space, and I found that little space right there. And then I'm just gonna lightly, gently kind of tug, and it's kind of a gentle tug until they kind of get pulled apart like that. Okay, cool. And if I wanted to keep dividing, I could. And so I could come down here. You know, this is like enough for a nice little a whole little chamomile patch if I really wanted to. Sometimes I kind of just do 2 at a time, so then they can grow together as friends. But you could divide them into 1. So now that I've got a few of these little seedlings, I'm going to transplant them. So this could be, let's pretend this is your garden bed, or let's pretend it's a pot. You can do both, because some of you may have pots, some of you may have garden beds. But if this was the garden bed, I'd come in here and I would take my little babies, and this is a pair of 2, that's okay. And then I'm going to come in here and just create a little hole, tuck it in. And what I'm looking for is that that line from root to crown aerial parts, and that's where I really want the soil to be tucked in at. With the pot, same deal, you're kind of coming in here, opening it up, grabbing a couple and dropping it in and tucking it in, and then water. Make sure you water it pretty quickly. So that's chamomile. All right, next here we go. We've got some calendula for you. So we're gonna come in here and take a close look at transplanting this beautiful herb. And I'm gonna kind of, again, pry out a couple here. So I'll come in here, put that right down the side, and then kind of tug up. Got a nice little root ball there. I'm gonna do a couple here so you can see it. Right down here, kind of tugging and pulling. It's okay to grab the plant too. You just don't wanna like bend it too much. And so there's a couple plants with some nice root structures. If I'm going into a pot. And so what you notice is when you're transplanting, sometimes it has a big root ball and sometimes it has a little one. And that will change your strategies a little bit on planting. So if it's in a pot with a root ball decent size, you have to make sure there's enough room for it to fit in. So, okay, this is not too big where I have to use the other technique, but I'm just gonna kind of poke that in. What you're looking for, this is a great example of like this line from this is kind of what we call the crown. This is where the leaves start coming out. And unless it's a mint, you don't want to bury your crown, or the plant might rot and die. And so it's good to have that crown above ground. So if I'm going into the ground, I'm planting this in my little farm right here. Come right there, looking for that crown and kind of tucking it in. And that's give it a little water as well. So yeah, there's a little bit on calendula and transplanting. Here we go. This is our skullcap. What a beautiful little patch here, and I'm bringing in the fork right now. It's going to bring to help me kind of gather. So this large flat, I've got a little bit more space to use this fork, but I'll come in off the edge and start kind of prying up and kind of getting under there, kind of lifting that up a little bit. And I'm going to kind of grab a clump of it, bring it over to my workstation, and then again we'll work on teasing it apart a little bit. So, there's some little ones. So now I've got a pretty decent sized root ball. It's going to be harder to kind of tuck into that. So this is what I do in this scenario, is I'll start by filling, and then when it gets to about 3/4 full, I'll kind of create a little spot for it, and then I come around the sides, and kind of fill it the way up. If it gets too deep, then I'll give it a little tug, little lift, and then kind of press it in and ready to go. All right, next up we're going to get into some propagation techniques that are really about dividing and cutting of roots. So, you know, I'm really into all the different ways we can propagate plants, and sometimes seeding is easier, sometimes, excuse me, root division is easier, and it's just about navigating, like, how do I grow more plants? How do I grow these plants so we can spread them around, how we can build our patches, how we can just keep spreading this awesome, beautiful medicine of herbalism. So first thing I want to show you is one of my favorite tools. And so right here is a digging fork. And so this is probably the main tool I work with when I'm digging in the garden. And it's because it's a fork, and it's also specifically made for getting into the earth. So I'm going to show you a couple features. It has these square tines. And it's also strapped, meaning this whole unit is connected to the wooden handle. So that gives it a lot of strength. You might see other kind of forks out there. There's like hay forks, which have really long curly tines. And there's also that have flat, which are more spading forks. But this is one of your best tools to getting into the earth and digging roots up. What I'll say is beyond its strength, beyond its just, really hardy, this is a lifer tool. I like to talk about tools that last a really long time. This is probably $60, maybe $70, but it's gonna last a long, long time. You could pass it on to your kids if you have them. Yeah, so this is the one I get into the ground with and doing some good digging. The advantage of forks over spades or shovels is that they have these tines that have a lower percentage of chance of piercing the roots that are underground. And they also are easier to get into the earth, so you can really kind of get them in there and use your body weight to rock them back and forth and get a nice digging motion. So this is kind of the Tai Chi of using one of these. I'm using all my body weight instead of using my upper body like right. So right now we're going to get into root division. One of the first plants we're going to look at here is going to be peppermint. And so I'm going to just dive right in here a little bit and take a look. So here's our peppermint friend, and it's kind of sprouting up. And what I know about a lot of the mints is they don't actually have really deep tap roots. And I'm noticing all of a sudden those aromatics are coming out as soon as I kind of wafted and touched it. So you get that really nice peppermint brightening smell. But they don't have deep roots, and they have these kind of underground runners. So what I'm going to do is get in here and kind of loosen this up and see what happens. See what happens when we get in here and kind of dig this piece up. So I'm kind of gently rocking back and forth and then lifting and then kind of stirring that up. And I'm going to get my hands in here a little bit and we'll see what we come up with. Okay, great. So this is a classic example of kind of this plant. And I'm going to uncover it a little bit because it's a little hard to see. But we've got, you see this? We've got things that are connected. And so we've got a sprout here of green, we got a sprout there of green. Oops, that one wasn't connected after all. No, I think it just ripped. It did. And so these both can be planted as separate plants. And so that's like taking one plant and making it into two. And that's kind of the idea of root cuttings. And here's another one. Again, I could separate these and make two plants, maybe even more, right? So that's the idea. This is peppermint. I'll give you a little bit more detail in a minute. Okay, here we are. We've got the peppermint here. And this is a good example of how peppermint's kind of running out. This is going to be another example of root cutting. And so you can see that here's kind of a main plant here that's connected to this underground runner, and then we've got another pop up there. But each one of these sections, if you've got two nodes and you plant that, most likely that's going to grow a new plant. So what I'm saying is I'd come over here if I was growing on this guy. I'm going to trim off this little dead end, and then I'm like, okay, here's a little piece. I've got a couple nodes there. I could plant that, and then I could come down the line and I could plant that. And even though it doesn't have aerial growth yet, doesn't have green leaf, you plant that and give it some water, it's going to grow. And then I could plant that. So I came out with like 1, 2, 3 little plantings here. And that's how you grow your peppermint patch right there. All right, another friend that likes to be propagated by root cuttings or root division. I guess I should kind of differentiate. Root cuttings is something where you're typically taking a crown and cutting it into multiple pieces. I'll show you that in a minute. But root division is really about dividing plants that are connected together and making two. Great, so one of the plants I like to do that with is goldenrod. And so goldenrod is a plant that will do this root division with. They'll have multiple plants connected. And what I would say is that one of the ways I know plants like to do root division with is they often grow by runners. And so this bed used to be half this size, and over time it's kind of marching this way by underground runners. And I'd say like goldenrod seed spreads okay, but goldenrod as a runner, meaning how it spreads itself, how it continues to grow and expand, is through its underground runners. So we'll get in close here for a minute. Again, I'm going to use this trusty old digging fork, and I'm going to come up to this edge, and we're going to see what we come up with. So here we go, kind of digging in there. I'm going to prop that up a little bit. I'm going to just kind of do a couple to see how we're connected. Yeah, they're pretty solid in there. And then see if I can tease these apart a little bit. Might need a little kind of clipper action. And there's last year's growth. There we go. Okay, so we're getting a little closer here. We can see we've got a clump here with multiple plants, and then it's about teasing them apart a little bit. And this is a great example of that runner activity. It's sending off this main plant and shooting up another sprout, and that's really cool. And so we could technically take that cutting there and then plant it, and we would have a whole new plant. There's other kind of stuff in here too. And then here, another example of this running edge. And what we'll do is I'm going to weed that out. And we've got this runner here. And see those little rootlets are pretty critical for growing this. If it's just a stem, it may not grow as well. And then I'll kind of divide these up, kind of tease them apart. It's just like a gentle tugging motion. And now this is like we're really into like a root division. Fun! And next up, we got some goldenrod. Woohoo! Getting excited now. This propagation gets you excited. But this is a great close-up look of how goldenrod would grow. Here's a kind of last year's stalk here, but then we see some runners coming off it. There's a runner here. And this is like new growth coming up, which will turn into leaves. Right there, this is kind of coming up to leaf out, and it's got some rootlets. And then over here is another side shoot that's coming off, and with some more aerial growth. And so for this one, again, it's a classic root cutting / root division. And I'll kind of come in here and like, oh, I want to make sure I have enough root to sustain it and some rootlets, and I'm going to cut out a node there. And this can be planted in a nice mix. And again, I would probably cut this main flowering stalk back a little bit just to like lower the pressure on this new kind of rootlet that's been under stress with being cut off from the kind of parent plant. And then that gets potted up and watered and is happy and good to go. All right, so here we go. The next one, and we'll be demonstrating more of the root cuttings. And so these are typically plants that are perennials that have a crown, and sometimes that crown will put up multiple kind of growth buds, and that'll make more sense when I dig this up. So all right, here we go. This is comfrey. Kind of get my digging fork in there. Just gonna lightly dig this up. Got a rock in there too. Okay. Shake off the soil. And then, okay, here we go. Underneath, we've got kind of a big, tough plant here. And I'm going to tease some of that apart. And it's actually multiple plants. And I'm going to tease that apart. We'll tease this apart. See, there's a little bud there. See, that's kind of broke off. But I could plant that, and that's going to grow a new comfrey plant. And so you can see how this plant has multiple upshoots. Those are the growth buds. And so if you break those off, you can create a new plant and start separating them out. So there's little babes there. So I dug up this one plant, and all of a sudden we're looking at, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, even more, maybe even another one. So here's another example of this growth bud. And see, I could pop off a few of these and grow new plants. And this is comfrey. Cool. Okay, next up we'll look at the comfrey. And one thing we know about comfrey is that it can take over. And so what you want to make sure is that you're planting it somewhere that it's okay to plant, and that you kind of, I don't know if you need permission, but it's like one that can really take over. It's one that I don't actually put in my compost pile, the roots, because I know that those little roots can actually sprout from just a tiny bit of root. They can sprout, and if you're putting that in your compost and then you're spreading that compost in your garden, next thing you know, you got comfrey popping all over. And maybe you're like, yay! And but I like to have maybe a little more control over that. So anyways, what we were looking at before is kind of this root cutting, similar to Ella Campaign. We're coming in here, and I can, again, if it feels like an easy break, or I can just kind of slip in here and do a little slice and pull, and now we've got two plants, just like that. It could happen again here, because I notice there's more rootlets here, kind of cut in the middle, slice and pull. And we've got 3 plants now. So, and each of them have a little bit of this root and a little bit of some rootlets. And so these will all make new plants. Pretty exciting. And so sometimes what I'll do is, like, this is a pay it forward moment where you basically harvest your plant, make cuttings, but then harvest them for yourself to make medicine. And so it's pretty awesome a way to continue to grow your patches, continue to grow the plants, harvest roots, and also get some medicine for yourself. So I love it. All right, another one I wanted to demonstrate today is one that I love to do root cuttings with, and this is Elecampane, an Inula helenium. And I thought it's a great opportunity to kind of really see, like, you know, what am I looking at when I'm doing root division in a patch? And so, like, how do I pick which plants I actually want to do? And sometimes it's like a plant's growing somewhere I don't want it to grow. Sometimes it's a plant that's growing up on an edge. It's moving outside of its bed. And sometimes it's a thick bed that I'm trying to thin out a little bit. So as you come in here, you can kind of see a little bit. And right here, I'm seeing like a pretty big grouping of plants all close to each other. And to me that says, like, if I want to support the long-term sustainability of this bed in terms of they're competing for each other, that I want to thin this out a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is dig up one of these little sections, and then we can take a closer look at root cuttings as well. So I'm coming in over here, got the trusty digging fork as usual, and I'm definitely feeling grateful. I got a little wind coming through the garden. Nice cool breeze, and just kind of prying this up a little bit. And oh, it's a nice big section. And kind of thinning this out, I like to leave all the dirt here in the bed and not bring it with me. Kind of gently patting it to get some of that out. Sometimes I'll just kind of do a little side. The little rootlets, see all those little rootlets? And we're starting to see the main root. Again, you know, it's like coming into the harvesting process is a very spiritual process of appreciation and respect and tending the spot. And so we're tending this spot for these plants so they'll thrive, and doing a little thinning, and then we'll you know, return that space to how it was when we got here, and to make it look like we weren't even here. So I'll just pull this out. The rest of it is pretty in there, and then we'll take a closer look in a minute about how to do some cuttings on this. This is a classic root cutter. Sweet. Okay, here we're going to dive into a little bit of the closer look at the root cuttings and divisions. So come on over and swing over. And first up, this is that Elecampane. And what I'm looking at here is all these little nodes and buds that are growing off this main root structure. And so what I'll do is I'll start kind of peeling those off. I can just kind of break, or if it feels like I can get a really clean cut, I can come in there. And so boom, there's a plant right there. And so I've just peeled that off the main plant, and I can replant that. Generally, it's got, what I'm looking for is some main root, some rootlets, and then that can be transplanted. Also, when I'm moving into kind of putting energy into this root development, I'm really going to take off most of these aerial leaves. And so what I'm left with is putting energy again into the roots. And it's got some young leaves that are coming in still. From there, I'll just grab a nice little pot and put some soil in. So there's soil on the bottom, and then kind of tuck it in and make sure we water it right away, because, you know, this is a little stressful for it. But we're creating a new plant that can be grown in someone's garden. So there's a little one of Elecampane. Cool.